Okay, great, and thank you. And I'd also like to thank the gallery. So just as a reminder to the board, we do have some members of the public who continue to observe your meeting. So welcome to those members of the public, and thank you to the board for giving us the opportunity to provide this presentation. So this will be a bit of a review for the board, the initial part of the presentation, and I'll sort of rush through it a bit because these are foundational aspects that inform the budget, which I believe the board knows and knows well. So the CCRD budget is built on financing the strategic priorities reflected in the board adopted strategic plan. And as you are well aware, COVID-19 has required many adjustments to our usual service delivery. And in recognition of those changes, in July, you as the board began the process of formal amendment to your strategic plan for 2019-2022. And then in October 2020, you as the board adopted the CCRD 2019-2022 strategic plan amendments, changes to strategic priorities, advocacy items, and priority projects due to COVID-19. So in general terms, the CCRD budget is primarily built to finance your existing services, maintaining legislative compliance in all aspects of CCRD's governance and service delivery, and in implementing your strategic priorities through the strategic plan. The budget is still a bit of a work in process. I'll highlight a couple of items that are still being finalized in advance of your final adoption planned for March 25th. But your feedback on this presentation will help us to further finalize and refine and finalize the 2021-2020 year 5-year financial plan. So as you know, the regional district, sorry, I've confused myself which slide I'm on. So the budget presentation highlights, the first part of the presentation will provide just a very brief overview, particularly to benefit your constituents of who the CCRD is and what we do. And then we'll go through a best estimate of 2021 revenues and expenditures based on the 2020 actuals. So what this really comes down to is general statements of where the money is coming from and where it's going, what we plan to support CCRD service operations, what we plan to spend to support implementation of grant-funded projects, and what we plan to spend to implement 2021 strategic goals. This presentation also highlights changes this year to the general administration costs charged to each service, changes in revenue allocation through the provincial basic grant, and also highlights the new provincial supports for services, a one-time only for this year, arising from COVID-19. So you're very familiar with this slide. You've seen many iterations of it. It just covers off our jurisdictional service area and is a statement that the CCRD stands for the Central Coast Regional District. Our powers come through the BC Local Government Act and the Community Charter. And the jurisdictional boundaries of the regional district are established through letters patent and/or an order in council. And then there's just a little bit of a snippet from the 2016 census numbers to help show the distribution of population in the area as a whole. So the BC Local Government Act defines the regional district, including your mandates, decision-making process, jurisdictional authority, election rules, and bylaw-making powers. And it also outlines the powers of the province relative to our local government. And I think it's always important to be mindful of the overarching purposes of the regional district. And so Section 85 of the Local Government Act tells us what our purposes are. So recognizing that regional districts are an independent, responsible, and accountable order of government within their jurisdiction. The purposes of a regional district include providing good government for its community, providing the services and other things that the board considers are necessary or desirable for all or parts of its community, providing stewardship of the public assets of its community, and fostering the current and future economic, social, and environmental well-being of its community. So we do try to stay mindful of this guidance in the recommendations we provide to you as a board. So you're also quite familiar with this schematic. This is taken from the governance and service delivery study that was conducted by external consultants in 2017. And what we've highlighted here are a few service changes. So the bigger, lighter blue stars that you can see dispersed throughout the chart. These are a consequence of the new water systems that have come into CCRD's purview since 2017. And these are the new fire protection, or the new fire protection service. And we've added these stars here to the electoral area planning. I think this is a bit of a misstatement. Our land use and planning service is actually regional. And so we've made that correction to the figure. And here you all are, except for Lawrence, in a very fuzzy picture, and hopefully we'll get a better one at some point here to post around and share with your constituents. But this slide, the purpose of it, as you know, and most of you have already seen it, an iteration of this slide, is to break down the census population. So that basically the number of people within each area you're serving and representing. And so we've also included this slide, and we include it now every year, just to provide a bit of clarity to the public on what a requisition is. So when you work in a particular area, you tend to start speaking in the jargon of the profession. And so a requisition isn't always meaningful. So it's really just a fancy name for tax levy or taxes charged. So basically our process is to look at all the services we run. And at this point, we're running 24 concurrent services. And we look at what are mandated through the provincial legislation and service requirements, as well as our own bylaws. And then a yearly budget is created for how much money we think we need to operate each of the services. We endeavor to do a public consultation process that provides some opportunity for the constituents to review and give feedback on the budget. So the budget adoption and combined service totals are included in your package, and those are available on the website. And this presentation will also be posted on the website today. Then we provide the total to British Columbia, who collects the property taxes on our behalf every year. So they collect some for the province and some in the name of the school district, and then some on CCRD's behalf. And then they provide our requisition total to us in August. So I just would highlight for you, it's important to recall that your constituent's tax bill is a combined total, and it's a portion of that tax bill that's actually the regional district requisition, and not the entirety of the tax bill, as some constituents sometimes believe. So this is this year's converted values by property class, broken down into each area. And so the final column here demonstrates the percent total of converted assessed values. So you can see that residential properties collectively form the bulk of the converted assessed value. So it's just over 17 million of the $25 million total. And then the next greatest converted assessed value comes from businesses. That is more heavily allocated in Area A. And then utilities come in third, again, more heavily allocated in Area A. So the total revenues that we're working with in this year's budget is $12,615,192. Our surplus combined at the beginning of this year is appearing to be $1,560,434, but this total will adjust a bit once the audited financial statements are complete. So as I shared with the board over the last couple of meetings, this time of year is extremely busy for finance as we undertake the field audit and work with our auditors on the final financial statements for 2020. And that's what informs the final surplus forward for the beginning of the year. And that's still in progress, though this figure is much closer than the estimate we were able to provide in December of last year. Our total expenses are looking to be $13,468,610. So this is combined expenditures in large part of the grant-funded infrastructure projects. So of that 12,615,000 and some in total revenues, just over 10 million of that is grant-funded projects. So we're projecting a surplus at the end of the year through our budgeting process of $695,195. So these are just predicted carry forwards. It will likely be quite a bit more than that, depending on how well implementation of the grant funded projects go. And then the total tax levy that we are requesting requisition is $889,689. So it's important to note that this figure includes the new converted services of the fire protection service for Haggensburg and the Haggensburg Water Works parcel tax. And so this figure compared to 2020, if you remove these services, it's actually closer to 775,000. So as we requested from the board in December for guidance, we're proposing an overall 2% total tax levy increase from 2020, and we've achieved that in this draft budget. So here's the breakdown by service of what we're proposing to requisition. So what you can see is the total requisition by service and how that breaks down for each area. This constitutes the percentage of the total requisition. So we're looking at requisitioning 27.4% of the total requisition being spent in general operations, 2% of the total requisition being spent in grant and aid, and so on down the column. So there are some changes. For example, I'd highlight the service requisition for economic development is quite a bit lower in 2021. This is a regional service. This is not because the priorities in economic development have fallen away. It's simply because due to a change in staffing and other matters.
I muted my speaker.
I'm sorry?
Did you need anything? I muted my.
No, you didn't. It's not muted.
I've muted it for him. Thank you. So I apologize. So so for the economic development service, there was just a significant surplus forward. And so we've reduced some of the requisition in economic development, which accounts for that change. For land use planning, it's more or less the same requisition as last year. We're looking at a significant increase in solid waste management. and some modest adjustments in the other services. And upcoming, I have a slide that shows in detail what the change in requisition is by service. So I won't spend too much time on that here, but this gives you a sense of, in terms of the requisition, where that funding is being allocated by service and by area. Do you need more time with this slide, or may I move forward?
Maybe just one more minute.
Okay.
Okay, I'm feeling good about it. If anybody else needs more time, let us know.
I see that the writing is it's quite small. I have a very large computer screen here at Central Coast Law, so I'm very, very lucky to be able to read it. But can can our guests from the public see the details on here as well? Does anybody, is everybody able to see this stuff?
We would be more than happy to reformat the slide, and thank you for that feedback. Just to make it larger and more legible. Thank you. Shall I move on?
Sounds good.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry, Chair Schooner, you were on mute. Were you sharing something?
Oh yeah, I don't hear any objections, so yeah, proceed on to the next one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here's a comparator for you just to give some deeper context and the significance of the change of the numbers for this year. So you can see the 2021 CCRD revenues broken down by their class. And you can see by the pie chart that the vast majority of revenues that we are financially administrating are falling within the provincial and federal grants. And as I noted earlier in the presentation, that constitutes just over 10 million or 84% of our entire revenues. And so we've provided a comparator to 2020. So in 2020, the provincial basic grants constituted about 76% of our total revenues. And the breakdown of local property taxation, this change from 78,970 to 889. Again, this is largely a difference to do with the Higgins-Berg service conversions. And you can also see through this pie chart the revenues that remain the same. And I'm sorry, I'm just seeing an error in this chart. I apologize. This is the 2017. So that figure is actually quite different. Yes. So this is not accounting for the full provincial grant revenue. So this total is incorrect, but we will fix that before we post it today. May I move on?
Yes.
Okay. So we also wanted to provide a comparator to 2017. And I continue to use 2017 as a marker because it was from that point forward that we started to see quite a lot of adjustments in our staffing, but we don't have greater staffing levels. So as you know, there's been some transition over the years. We're training our finance manager into the role of CFO, but we've had quite a lot of change in that area. I continue to serve as your CFO, given that that capacity change, as well as new supports and as well as a new land use and planning coordinator. And so I think it's significant for the board to continue to be mindful that at this point, just a few years ago, when there was the same number of staff and many with far more experience, only 37% of the regional district's revenues were in the form of special grant fund projects, or 779,000. And today we are administrating over $10 million in infrastructure special grant revenues. So this is for the board's benefit in helping to contextualize the capacity constraint and challenges we continue to bring forward to the board as we endeavor to deliver the best possible services that we can, as really the requisition values we are working with have not changed significantly in those years. So we're not working with significantly more tax revenue resources in our core general operations and service delivery, but we are responsible for delivering far more in terms of financial management, particularly for the special grant funded projects. And so this is our proposed tax levy broken down by service. So that big total we showed you in terms of the total requisition, this is how we've broken it down by individual services. And I just note you will not see the Denny Island Recreation Service in the pie chart because as per the request, we have done a 0% requisition for that service for this year. So again, the greatest portion of the tax levy at about 27% would go into the general administration service. The next greatest is the local service of refuse disposal, but incorporated in that is regional solid waste planning. And so that requisition is currently drafted at the maximum. We're at our ceiling for what we can requisition for refuse disposal at 130,996. And that constitutes 17% of our total requisition. Followed by the regional library. We do not set that requisition level. We are, basically charged directly by the regional library board of directors and are required, again, I mentioned earlier, some of our services are legislated by statute, and this is an example of a regional district that shall provide this requisition. The pool, Centennial Pool, will constitute 12% of this year's requisition, followed by regional emergency management, followed by the Bella Coola Fire Protection, followed by parks and recreation, economic development, grant and aid, and then planning is also a more significant aspect of the requisition at 8%, but this is reflective of your strategic priority for official community planning. Are you ready to move on?
Yep.
So as I noted earlier, we've laid out for you the changes in requisition by service. So the total regional functions have seen a decrease collectively by 6%. So basically we're requisitioning less for the regional services. So that includes planning. So there's a 0% change effectively from last year. Feasibility studies have gone down by 100%, and this is reflected in your strategic plan where we've postponed feasibility studies until we're through the pandemic. There is a reduction also in the community and economic development services. As I explained earlier, there's a significant surplus forward in that budget. And so we reduced the overall requisition and regional requisition there. We do have an increase in emergency management, and this is to account for with our surplus forward didn't quite cover off entirely the commitment under the MOU for the contribution to the shared coordinator. And as that conversation is still in abeyance with leadership, we did incorporate that into the budget. But, you know, depending on the outcomes of those conversations, whatever is spent or unspent out of that service budget would just carry it forward to next year. And this is, and there is also a new contract coordinator function incorporated into that service. Grant and aid, there is no change. What we can requisition for that service is actually set by the legislation, like the maximum values. And so this may, so this gets adjusted by what the converted assessed value is. So we do have to charge it to the entire region. It's 10 cents per $1,000 of converted assessed value. So last year's projections had that at 15,200, and we proposed to keep it the same this year because we still don't have the final numbers from BC assessment for the 2021 roll. We do have the draft numbers. And again, there's been an increase imposed by the Vancouver Island Regional Library. Our general operations has decreased by 6.3%, and this accounts for increases in the apportioned administration that are being charged out to local services, and particularly Bella Coola Valley services. And then for this, the area-specific services. So these are services that are charged to local service areas and not to the region as a whole. Of course, the Denny Island Recreation Service will have a 100% decrease. And this is because there's zero requisition in the 2021 budget. The Denny Island Airport, the requisition remains the same. The Bella Coola Valley Airport, there was a 0% change. Because we never requisitioned for that service or haven't to date. There is a substantial increase in the Bella Coola Valley house numbering, 534%, which equates to a $6,000 increase in real dollar terms. And this is because at the request of volunteer firefighters in our department, they're quite concerned about the lack of a house numbering map that first responders can use for rapid deployment to an emergency situation, for lack of figuring out where the blue house is next to the old hydrant up the street from, you know, Sam Schooner, right? So this is sometimes the calls that they get. And so they've requested that we undertake a mapping project to make their emergency deployment easier. There's an increase in the Bella Coola Valley requisition. This is to account for significant grant funding awards in that service area, requiring more, basically more apportioned administration. The Bella Coola Valley Solid Waste Management. So I'm sorry, this got put in backward. This is a 5.5% increase, not decrease. And so that change, we're now at the ceiling for that requisition, as I mentioned earlier. The Bella Coola Valley Swimming Pool is also seeing an increase in requisition, again, to account for the infrastructure grant funding project and higher overarching administration fees, and also an increase in training fees for a new training program that the Commission is initiating as part of their service envelope this year. And the Bella Coola Valley street lighting will go up as well. And this is largely set by BC Hydro's utility bills for that service. So the Bella Coola Fire Department will have a decrease of about $2,000 in their requisition this year. Then we'll see increases in the street lighting, again, due to the utility charges. And BC Hydro, I think, is planning to change a bunch of light bulbs. And so some of the cost of that is being passed on to the local service area. May I continue?
Yes.
Okay, so just to highlight, some of the considerations in the budget. As I've mentioned earlier, many of our service requirements are informed by provincial statute. They are just things that have to be done to maintain compliance. And some of those compliance matters, change over time. So for example, the public sector accounting standard for the asset retirement obligations is a new standard. We have no choice but to comply, but this does add cost to the regional district to do the assessments in order to properly book those liabilities. So one of the additions, for example, to the service budget in Community Works is so that our overarching service envelope can be properly assessed, so we are prepared when we are required to book those liabilities to have the studies complete by professionals that the auditors will accept as providing an informed assessment of those costs. So the general operations budget, we do have new expenses in there for hardware and software so that we are doing a better job of supporting your virtual meetings, supporting virtual governance generally with the commissions and committees as well, supporting ongoing remote work options for our employees to conform with provincial guidance, and as well to better affect collaboration using current software and tools. I've spent a few days working in some professional development seminars on this topic with the Local Government Management Association, as well as our colleagues in other regional districts. And we are very much undertaking what the trend is for all local governments at this time. There has just been a massive change in need and expectation around governance and virtual governance and remote work. And so we have allocated budget to best support CCRD to keep up with the times. And we're also looking ahead at getting support for some policy revisions to bring forward to the board to affect some of those changes into the future. And so right now we currently employ 5 full-time staff to fulfill our service requirements. So myself as your sole employee, the CAO, I can currently serve as your CFO and for our statutory purposes as your emergency program coordinator, though we do have new contract support in place to assist me with that role. We have a finance manager. We also have an operations manager who oversees all our public works and management of our airports. We have a land use and planning coordinator and an executive and operations assistant. So we've also hired a part-time records and accounting clerk. So that's a 4-day-a-week position at this time. And we also support a recycling attendant through our solid waste budget and seasonal pool staff through the Centennial Pool budget. And through our administration of public works, and as we've chatted with you back when you were developing your strategic plan, the administration is ongoing work through that pyramid that I shared with you on the foundations of good governance and administration for our organization. And so we're continually assessing our human resource needs and what's pragmatic and supportable into the future. And so immediately we're looking at recruiting a new public works technician to assist with not only the overall public works service delivery, but particularly to provide support for the special project implementation. There's, as you've seen in the demographic, in the charts, there are over $10 million in grant funds that we're administrating. Many of those are in infrastructure and public works. And so our next cautious and forward-looking investment in human resources would be in the public works area. And during this time, administration is looking ahead to the economic development service needs, and particularly looking ahead to the post-pandemic conversations that we expect to be having with the board during the strategic plan review in September and towards the 2022 budget for recovery from COVID-19. And so we are also keeping our ears open for the kind of supports and investments the province is prepared to make in that area, and evaluating the kind of staff and support that we will need and it's most prudent to effect a recovery plan that makes sense for our region. And so again, your strategic priorities are an important foundation for the development of these budgets. And so again, there's a strategic plan amendment that the board adopted back in September, but your overarching goals remain the same, which were good governance and administration, so fostering efficiency and service delivery, building our capacity and strengthening our relationships and innovative partnerships, improving our infrastructure, so investing in safe and sustainable public works and services, and effective community planning, enhancing our social, health, environmental, and economic systems. So, one highlight out of your strategic plan, you had set community planning as the top strategic priority. Our budget does reflect that. We have projected some consultancy support and project supports. To date, our land use and planning coordinator has overseen the grant application for an official community plan and asset management project, which the board has reviewed in a previous meeting for support in principle. And we continue to make that a high priority moving forward for this service. And some encouraging news, the board had mandated a new committee to support addressing abandoned and derelict buildings in Ocean Falls, which was to be called the Ocean Falls Revitalization Committee. And British Columbia provincial servants have recently reached out to the administration to progress their support for the committee. So budget has been allocated in the Economic Development Service to support this work and potentially an initial meeting in Ocean Falls, pandemic considerations pending. So we've gotten signs now that the province is going to make this particular project important. There's interest. And so we want to make sure that the budget is ready for how the board wishes to proceed. And I won't say much more on that because I know Director Bertrand in due course will have much more to share on this particular file and priority. The board had mandated a zero requisition of the Denny Island Recreation Commission service. And so we have done that to acknowledge the Commission's desire to suspend requisition from the entirety of Area A until the future of the Commission and the service is resolved. And also the board had mandated a review of landfill conformance in the Bella Coola Valley as part of the refuse disposal service. This work is largely being subsidized through an allocation of the Community Works Fund, which previously was brought forward to the board. And more time and effort at both the administration and governance levels is going to be required to examine the future and the fiscal options for this service. And that includes significant effort to establish stable projections for a balanced budget into the future. So in order to meet the post-closure liability needs, as an example, our 5-year financial plan projects, over $160,000 in service requisition, which means that we would need a change in the establishing bylaw to affect that level of requisition. But we don't want to advance that until we've finished our discussions with you on what that future actually is, what the life of the landfill is going to be projected to be, so we can finalize those costs and properly plan for the revenue and expenditures for this service into the future. And it's a fair bit of work, and I think the board all understand why. And so new consultancy fees have also been included in this budget to ensure that we are properly supporting now at the bureaucratic tables, improving transportation for emergency and primary health needs. And so at a future meeting, I believe in April, Allison will be able to provide you an update on this work. Okay, and so the apportioned administration is an important aspect of the budget, and this board in particular has driven significant changes to how the regional district handles apportioned administration to the services. And so, as you know, the requirement to apportion costs of services comes out of Section 379 of the Local Government Act that basically tells us the administrative costs of the service are costs of the service. So CCRD services require governance, they require financial management, they require human resources to operate as local government services. And the cost of governance, financial management, and full-time human resources are bundled into the general operations, and a portion of these costs are charged to each service in the form of apportioned administration. So the numbers do tell a story. And it's your story of the board-driven changes to how we do this. So back in 2018, we charged out $198,000 to the services. In 2021, we're proposing $559,000, excluding the Hagensburg services, because I wanted to give you a true comparator of the existing services. So next year, the comparator will include the Hagensburg services, both for 2021 and 2022. So a more rigorous calculation has been developed over the last couple of years that takes into account estimates of staff time, allocation to each service, the cost of governing the services, financial management of the service, including auditing fees. In 2021, you directed a volunteer matrix to make sure that we were capturing the in-kind support of volunteer labor against those services. So that would result in a reduction in the apportioned administration costs. And then new in 2021, we've added the costs of building and utilities overhead, consultancy fees, office supplies, and tools. And so this year would complete the transition of the full gamut of general operation costs being fully factored into the apportioned administration calculation. And these new cost allocations account for some of the increases that you're seeing in the apportioned administrative costs for 2021. And then in the total figure that includes the Hagensburg converted services, you would see a more dramatic jump in that apportioned administration cost. So here are the comparators from last year to this year. So as you can see here, the Bella Coola airport is being charged significantly more, and this is to account for the increase in costs we are experiencing to sustain the certification we work so hard to regain. And so a future conversation our administration plans to bring to the board is basically a review, a cost-benefit analysis of now sustaining that certification. All these efforts were built in a pre-COVID world when there were significantly more revenues and flights and demand and growing demand and projections of growing tourism. Certification is extremely costly. It requires internal audits of our safety management system, a high level of reporting, as well as an external audit, which costs money because it's more professional consultancy fees. And so we're seeing that increase in our apportioned administration. We also have another big grant funded project that we didn't have last year. And so that again is the new fueling station. And so some of that apportioned administration also accounts for the elevated cost to this service. And then for refuse disposal, again, we've seen an increase. The board and our administration is doing an incredible amount in the service, and that's reflected in the apportioned admin. The pool is more or less the same. There's a bit of an increase because we've gotten more money toward the project. And so we've accounted for that for the addition of time dedicated to that service. We've reduced the apportioned administration to economic development, and this is just a reflection that we were fully charging the service for a full-time staff person dedicated to that function, and we're not doing that this year. The apportioned admin to emergency management has increased, and this is just a reflection of the board's time and as well as our managerial time dedicated to that service. Increases in parks and recreation, again, for the purposes of infrastructure grant project management. Increases to the library service, the street lighting and house numbering and street lighting services. Some of those smaller services where where we are factoring in now new costs as we've added to the overhead generally for the general and the apportioned administration calculation. And then I would highlight for the Denny Island services, we chose to keep those allocations the same. This is because we recognize that the volunteer subsidy is quite important in the Denny Island community, and we didn't want to further stress those services, especially with the conversation about potentially collapsing the commission with the kind of increases we were seeing in the other services. So we just kept those in abeyance from the 2020 values. And then we did add new apportioned administration to feasibility studies and grant and aid. We have not charged apportioned administration to those services before, but as they know, grant and aid in particular takes your time. It definitely takes administrative time. And as does the feasibility studies for your attention and review, your direction over those priorities, and then our work in affecting those studies. So, and then I would just highlight for you the Haggensburg Waterworks and Haggensburg Fire Department. The Improvement District adopted their budget prior to the conversion. They did their best estimate at what the regional district might charge for apportioned administration. This is reflected here. That I anticipate there will be quite different numbers for the 2022 budget once we've factored in all the considerations we use for our general operations into those two services. And so for this year, we've just adopted what the Improvement District had allocated. Oh, sorry, were you okay with going on?
I'm fine. Yeah.
Me
Yes.
too.
Ooh, teeny tiny.
Yes? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and so another important conversation that this board has driven is how the provincial basic grant is allocated. And the board has mandated that the regional district transition the allocation of the provincial basic grant from local service areas to regional service and more specifically general operations. This has been an enormous financial hit, as the board has already heard administration speak to in the past for a couple of key services that have depended on that allocation. And so the board graciously agreed for another transition year given the strain on COVID, which has impaired our administration's ability to cope with the loss of revenue in a few key services because of constraints on our own capacity from COVID-19. So we're looking forward to the 2022 service budget and continuing to effect that change. So to demonstrate this, basically you'll see unchanged numbers. There's a bit of an increase, so we've allocated more to the Denny Island Waterworks, and this is just because the apportioned administration to that infrastructure service increased a bit, just because we're doing a whole lot more with urban systems around the implementation, but this is entirely offset by the allocation of the provincial basic grant. And so that money is returning to general operations in any case. And then emergency management, we did do a slight increase in there, and this is just to get to a balance without further increasing the requisition. But I would note that both economic development and emergency management are regional services, so the whole region is benefiting from this allocation. And I just want to note, I made a small error and I apologize for that. I was unclear what the total allocation of the provincial basic grant was, and it is a flat 200,000. And so we will be doing adjustment that will impact general operations out of the general operations surplus. So you won't see any change to the balance of the budget. It will just be a slight reduction in this 148,620, which will be offset by the service surplus forward. And then this proper 200,000 will be reflected in that comparator. Okay, are there any further time needed for this? Should I carry on? Okay, thank you. And so again, we like giving you the visual so you can see the comparison. So just as you know, the solid waste management and Centennial Pool in particular were quite reliant on the provincial basic grant as two example services. And so from 2016 to 2019, it generally constituted about 34% of the solid waste budget and 50% of the Centennial Pool budget. And now oh dear.
Oh, hey, Courtney, I have to switch over to my my phone. So I'm just putting on, oh, and you're admitting me to the meeting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, thank you. So I will entirely take this back because this is not showing you anything. My apologies. This is not what you want to see here. But anyway, what it should have shown, what the chart will show once we correct this error of mine, is that there is a reduction in the solid waste contribution for the provincial basic grant, and it disappears from the Centennial Pool basic grant. So we will get that image clarified. Okay, and so again, you just saw this summary. So, but this particular chart shows you the percentage of the whole that the provincial basic grant. So 75% of it is going into the regional services, and 24% is going into the local services, particularly parks and recreation in Bella Coola, recreation on Denny Island, solid waste management in Bella Coola, and the Denny Island Waterworks. Can I carry on?
Yes.
Okay. So the Community Works Fund, this is always of great interest to the board. This is the distribution that we have budgeted for 2020. So 200,000 remains unallocated. So the projected budget surplus carry forward in 2022 right now is projected to be 320,979. So the projects that we allocated Community Works Fund to are the Denny Island Water Infrastructure Project, the Bella Coola Valley Centennial Pool retrofit, the Bella Coola Valley landfill development of operations and post-closure plan, asset management planning. And so this would constitute a contribution toward the official community planning and regional asset management planning that we've applied for grant funding for. And $50,000 to hire consultants to assist us with the asset retirement obligations that come from the new provincial or the new public standard for account. the new public sector accounting standard, pardon me. And then another $10,000 to contribute toward the official community plan development. May I carry on? And then finally, we just wanted to highlight the Safe Restart grant as we brought forward to the board in December. The regional district was awarded grant funding to the tune of $340,000 to assist our services with managing COVID through the duration of the pandemic and the transition. So currently, we've allocated the grant to general operations.
Isn't it nice not having to?
Distributed to general operations, which is regional, to emergency management, also regional, to land use and planning, which is regional, and significantly to the Bella Coola Airport, which is local, Centennial Pool, which is local, and the Denny Island Airport, which is local. Because these are the services that either have a COVID-related need that's prominent, or that have lost significant revenues as a consequence of COVID. But very recently, like while we were preparing to present this to you, we received notification that there is a new funding pool available to us to apply for, that's specifically for airport operations support through COVID. So our operations managers worked quite hard to pull together a funding application for that funding opportunity. And if we're awarded those funds, we would just take what we didn't need from the restart grants and in the Bella Coola Airport service budget and allocate those into general operations and use them for the transition for all of our services and governance collectively. So that concludes our presentation, and I welcome